There's a rule of thumb that when looking at large studios and publishers in the AAA landscape, that whatever they put out is basically going to be devoid of care and talent. I'm talking about your EAs, 2Ks, Ubisofts, and what have you. It's nothing new. Even when it wasn't one creatively bankrupt disaster after another, these companies were always pushing things in this direction. At the bottom line, it's always about the money for these publishers. And eventually, when the payouts started getting bigger, it was inevitable that the higher-ups would start getting more and more involved, much to the detriment of actually getting a good product at a reasonable price. Now, I understand publishers don't technically develop games, but most, if not all, have their own in-house studios that essentially do their bidding. Not saying someone like Massive Entertainment is necessarily devoid of talent, but you can tell that their work is in line with that corporate vision of what a game should be. And ultimately, they're little more than an extension of the publisher's will. Now that being said, if you're even slightly into gaming beyond a surface level, there's always been companies that exude quality. Even if they were occasionally screwed over by corporate mandate or just bit off more than they could chew, you could always rely on them to put out something interesting. Nowadays, though, it's becoming more and more the case that I look at all these studios that I and many others used to hold in high regard, and I can only think to myself, what the fuck happened? Did everyone just forget how to make a video game? Seems for whatever reason, all these studios who used to be bastions of quality just can't make a compelling game to save their life. There's something off about them. They're more akin to skinwalkers masquerading as these studios. I think a lot of people are quick to throw their hands up and say shit like, it's all corporate meddling, or AAA games are far too demanding and it's just too much to contend with nowadays. Without getting too much into the weeds of things, those things can be true, of course. I would never disagree with the principles that those aren't massive issues, but I ultimately don't think it's a good enough explanation for the issues we're seeing. There are exceptions, of course, but I can't shake this feeling that a rot has set in on so many studios that used to put out good work. Is it little more than the passage of time that's doomed all these companies to utter mediocrity? Yes. Let me paint you a picture. Say you have a grocery store, and that store runs for 30 years. Do you think everyone who initially worked there is still going to be after 3 decades? Hell, never mind the low-level employees, there's a good chance that all of the upper management will be different people. Maybe even the owner. Now, no one would cite this as some crazy-ass revelation. After such a long amount of time, people are bound to have moved on. Whether they quit, were fired, or retired, it would be totally insane to expect the entirety of the same staff to still be there. Businesses that do well also tend to expand, so a bunch of new people are going to be brought in regardless if the old people are still there or not. Now, why would a game studio be any different? They have employees like any other business. I think a lot of people have this strange expectation that these companies in particular will always be the same entity. I'm one to talk because I'm guilty of it as well. It's an irrational thing. In the back of your mind, you're aware that the makeup of the people would have to be different. But when you see a company logo, you don't necessarily associate it with the people that made the game. You more so connect the studio with their past works. Or maybe you think of some guy from a promotional video that doesn't work there anymore. The point is, what you associate with a name and a logo doesn't necessarily translate to reality. Of course, these studios often don't make it easy to know the truth. They aren't exactly in the habit of coming out and saying, hey, everyone who was a driving force behind the thing you like left, so feel free to write us off. Beyond cross-referencing the credits of individual games, I don't know how you'd actually confirm or deny how many of the original people are still working somewhere with any kind of concrete evidence. I think it stands to reason though. A business is a business and you're gonna have turnover no matter what you do. We also have to consider that this is more or less unprecedented. So many studios were prematurely purged in the 2010s that most of these companies didn't have the opportunity for entropy to set in. So I do believe this is the first time we're seeing this happen on such a large scale. Now, going back to the grocery store, as long as food's being stocked on the shelves, it doesn't really matter who works there. Nothing could be farther from the truth when it comes to making good games. Of course, you have the surface level attributes. If a bad programmer takes charge of a project, it's obviously going to suffer. However, the creative direction a work takes is even more important. All your technical people, artists, and musicians could be totally rock solid, but if the game doesn't present any sort of interesting ideas, it won't matter. Oh, and when I say interesting ideas, that includes being fun, by the way. Of course, just because old people leave and new ones come in, it doesn't mean it's totally impossible to maintain a studio's former legacy. I've noticed that the Japanese are particularly good at this. I have a sneaking suspicion that it's because they have a very honorific culture, but that's just a theory. Whatever the reason, there are a ton of examples of long-running franchises that share a requisite amount of DNA with their earlier entries. Mario, Resident Evil, Final Fantasy, just to name a few. Even the games that stray the farthest from the formula still aren't unrecognizable. Say what you will about Resi 6 or Final Fantasy 13, it's clear what franchise they belong to. But even if a studio doesn't strictly maintain that lineage, it doesn't automatically equate to disaster. It doesn't in any way resemble itself from yesteryear. All the key people have left, and the company's biggest claim to fame, i.e. pushing the boundaries of gaming tech, isn't in their wheelhouse anymore. From a gameplay perspective, the new Dooms don't resemble any of their old output either. If anything, they play more like Serious Sam. For all intents and purposes, id nowadays merely makes Doom-themed games. But honestly, if people resonate with them, the fact that id's basically a different company doesn't matter. Unfortunately, things have a tendency to trend downwards, and most of the time we are not getting a different vision per se, but rather a lack of vision.
You had paid the price for your lack of vision.
As well as, well, frankly, lack of technical ability. You will pay the price for your lack of technical ability. Take a peek at Avowed. Not only did its story and world building fail to impress, the game was less technically advanced than Skyrim, than Oblivion even. The company that supposedly lives and breathes RPGs shouldn't be putting out something this poor. You can't even blame the big corporate overlords. This is a single-player RPG. Now, I guess it had trouble development, but as far as I can tell, the problems were self-induced and not Microsoft's fault. But there's so many studios that are in the same situation. Bungie, BioWare, Tripwire, Overkill, and that's what I can think of just off the top of my head. Every recent launch from these companies have been a total disaster. These supposed veterans of industry have no idea what they're doing. Well, it's like I've been saying, they aren't veterans of industry. The majority of people who knew what they were doing already left. Now, as much as I've been skirting around the issue, even I have to admit that publisher interference is a contributing factor a great deal of the time. Take Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. Warner Brothers decided halfway through that it needed to be a live service game, and that just threw the whole thing into a tailspin. A lot of people at Rocksteady left during the development because it was such a disaster. It was a compounding issue. Developing the game was going bad, so talented people left, making development even worse. Here's the thing though, whatever the reason, the trajectory of Rocksteady as a company has been irrevocably changed. I think a lot of people think in their heads that if Rocksteady isn't forced to make another live service game, their output would be on par with their past works. I'm sorry, but the damage is already done. The chances of them making another great game are astronomically unlikely. Even if this next hypothetical project isn't a total disaster, it's probably gonna fail to impress. Think something on par with Gotham Knights more than anything Arkham related. Ultimately, that's my point. You need to stop holding out hope for these companies. There are very few sets of circumstances where these studios can ever get their mojo back. People want to hold out hope that these entities that make games that they enjoyed will eventually pull things together, but all this leads to is giving way too much benefit of the doubt. Anecdotally, you can witness this with Bungie. Once they split with Activision Blizzard, everyone rejoiced. Finally! Destiny 2 will be free of all this incessant nickel and diming. Bungie then promptly turned around and tripled down on monetizing every aspect of the game. In fact, it's become such an incomprehensible nightmare, it's all but an impossibility to onboard new players. How about Marathon? What a great opportunity to go back to your roots and make a new single-player sci-fi shooter. Nope. Another live service trying to get into a genre that leadership thought was going to be the next big thing. Gee, how's that going? These Skinwalker studios essentially get free PR for the games their predecessors made. They're all slowly and surely eroding that goodwill, but all it takes for them is to go back to the graveyard and throw one of the corpses up of a beloved franchise to pique people's interest. Do you really think no one's gonna buy Mass Effect 5, even though the last 3 BioWare games have been terrible? I mean, it's Mass Effect, of course they are. I will admit though, that if this one fails, it's probably the final straw. Truthfully, most of these Skinwalkers are on thin ice. There's a lot of studios that I can point to and say, if their next project is a disaster, they're probably done. I can't say I'd be that cut up about it either. There are a lot of companies I can look back on and still get upset at how done dirty they were. But these shambling corpses making a mockery of these former greats, well, I can't say their closure is gonna tug on my heartstrings any. That might sound callous, but ultimately what's the point in keeping them around if they're gonna constantly fail in their mission goal in making good pieces of entertainment? Look, whether I'm sympathetic or not, at the end of the day, people are gonna stop buying their games sooner or later. Unfortunately for them, they don't have a captured audience like COD or Madden or whatever. They can't rake in the cash just by simply existing. They actually have to put on a good show to stay afloat. I'm not saying it's a total impossibility that these companies will never put out something worthwhile again. I'm just saying be wary, be discerning. These aren't the game studios they present themselves to be, and if they do put out something good, it's in spite of everything they have going against them. After all, good things can't last forever, and it might be time to start paying attention to some up-and-comers instead of hoping that these fallen idols will eventually get their shit together. Saber and Teon have been making good names for themselves recently. These companies cut their teeth in the late 2000s and early 2010s, and it's clear they've learned a lot of lessons from their past missteps and failures. Mundfish came out swinging with Atomic Heart, now they're hard at work on the sequel, while also publishing Ill. I've been keeping an eye on Ill since the concept phase, and I have to say, seeing actual, what is purported to be gameplay, this is quite impressive. Admitting that you'll never get another experience quite like Fallout New Vegas, Halo, or Mass Effect again might be a hard pill to swallow, but it's the way of the world. Things are constantly in flux. One day a studio's making Mass Effect 2, and the next day they're making Anthem. There's nothing to be done about it but move on and look to the future, and hope that a new group of bright, motivated people who are with it will capture a similar level of greatness. Because there's an inverse as well. One day a studio's making the Rambo game, and the next they're making RoboCop Rogue City, or making Inversion and then going on to make World War Z. Things can always get better, and I wholeheartedly think that they will. And if they don't, well, can always just go back and play Halo for the umpteenth time.